The sun barely kissed the horizon as we woke, the camp enveloped in a calm, peaceful morning. Many of the women had departed early to gather turnips, while my uncles had already set off to hunt. I remained behind with my grandmother, frail but unwavering, and one of my uncles. None of us anticipated the storm brewing around us, but that morning would soon turn into one marked by bloodshed, chaos, and unyielding bravery. As preparations for the Sundance began, we broke camp and moved along the Rosebud, establishing our settlement with the river running through its heart. The next morning, the camp crier called out, "Brave men, ready yourselves, for your moment has arrived." This was the time to send our prayers to the Great Spirit, and Chief Sitting Bull guided the sacred ceremony, with numerous members from various bands joining the ritual. Most of the Sioux Nation participated, except for those near the agency or forts. For 2 days, we danced, while the chiefs dispatched scouts to protect the holy ground from potential disruptions. During the celebrations, we boys entertained ourselves with playful mischief, tossing elm leaves at each other and poking fun at those who had no shirts. We fashioned pop guns from ash branches and gleefully shot them at both women and men. It felt like a joyous occasion, filled with the energy of holy children, and the camp was alive with vibrancy. When the Sundance came to an end, rumors circulated about white soldiers approaching from the south. Scouts were sent out, and upon their return, the announcer urged us to dismantle the camp. From the Rosebud, we moved southward toward Greasy Grass Creek. The following day, we progressed slowly to the Little Bighorn, camping at the headwaters of Spring Creek. Scouts reported soldiers drawing near, and the warriors began preparing to confront them. The announcer proclaimed, "The scouts have returned with news. The soldiers are camped along the Rosebud River. Young warriors, take courage." Quote, what began as an ordinary day quickly became a struggle for survival as cries echoed across the village, and the news of approaching soldiers forced us to prepare for the inevitable. This is the story of that day, a memory etched in dust and fire. Quote, on that fateful morning, as we rose with the first light, most of the women headed out to dig for turnips, and my uncles were already off hunting. My grandmother, who was quite old and frail, my uncle, and I stayed back in our teepee. I wandered down to the river to take a swim, feeling the coolness of the water against my skin. When I returned, dripping and with only my shirt on, my hair still braided from the night, my grandmother was already busy by the fire, frying up some meat over the ashes. The smoky aroma filled the teepee as she served us a warm meal. As we ate, my uncle turned to me and, with a sense of urgency, said, "After you finish eating, you'd better go and get the horses. Something might happen all of a sudden. You never know." Just as I was about to finish my meal, a commotion stirred outside, and we heard a crier's voice ring out. The chargers were coming. 2 men had ventured out to gather horses, but one of them had been killed. The announcement sent a chill through me. My uncle, grimly shaking his head, repeated, "I told you this might happen. You'd better go right away and get the horses." The horses were across the Little Bighorn, so I ran, wading through the river until the water reached my chest. Climbing up to the top of Black Butte, I looked upstream and saw soldiers spread out across the hillside, charging down. They crossed the river and began advancing toward the flatlands. Reno's men, they were called. At that moment, Custer must have been making his way around. The hill I was on was littered with cactus, making it nearly impossible to descend quickly, especially with bare feet. I winced with every step, trying to navigate through the prickly ground, all while watching the clouds of dust rise in the distance, each swirl coming closer and closer. I glanced southward and saw Custer on top of a large hill, observing the battlefield. That sight prompted me to turn back to camp without the horses. As the soldiers moved downhill, the camp fell into a frenzy. The Oglalas and Hunkpapas were fleeing, their cries echoing all around. I waded back across the river and returned to the camp, hoping that someone would bring the horses. Meanwhile, the clash of battle grew nearer. I could see warriors charging towards the soldiers, surrounding them. Voices rose from all over, filling the air like a storm of sound above the village. Amid the chaos, our horses were finally brought back. I spotted my gray horse and quickly went to catch him. My uncle's voice rang out over the noise, steady and commanding. "Hurry up, we shall go forth." We traveled downstream to the mouth of Muskrat Creek, beyond the Santee camp. In front of us were the fronters, the bravest warriors seasoned in battle. At that time, I was just 16 years old and found myself in the rear with those who were less experienced. As we climbed further up the hill, I caught sight of the soldiers. They were off their horses, gripping the bridles tightly, fully prepared for our approach and firing their weapons. By this point, our warriors surrounded the hill on every side. I heard our men shouting, "They are gone," and noticed that many soldiers' horses had broken free and were bolting in panic. The battle cries echoed around us. "Hoka hey! Hurry! Hurry!" Then we surged forward, and a cloud of dust and smoke enveloped us. I could see warriors moving swiftly like shadows, while the cacophony of hoofbeats, gunfire, and shouts created an almost surreal atmosphere, where the noise felt oddly muted beneath the chaos. Suddenly, a soldier appeared right beside me. Without thinking, I leaned over and struck him down with the butt of my six-shooter. I believe I had already emptied the gun, but the moment was a blur. The soldier fell, and I could see him becoming lost beneath the stampede of hooves. There were so many of us that guns hardly seemed necessary. Just the power of our horses was enough. Afterward, we began descending the hillside toward the village, and along the way, I saw dead men and horses scattered everywhere. The scene was harrowing, with life extinguished all around us. Quote, "On the early morning of June 25th, Black Bear and several others were out visiting when they came across a trail that led into the valley of Little Bighorn. It was an old Sioux trail, but something caught their attention. They soon discovered fresh shod horse tracks over the older trail. Having recently battled soldiers, Crook, only a few days before, their suspicions were immediately aroused. One of them suggested they return to the top of the divide to get a better look, and they quickly did. From this vantage point, they could see the smoke rising from Custer's camp on their left, and way off to the right, a small party of men, likely scouts from Varnum's group. They deduced that the fresh horse tracks they spotted were from Varnum's party, which had advanced ahead of Custer. They made their way back to higher ground, where Varnum would eventually spot them. As Custer's dust approached the village from the east, he halted and seemed to be preparing for a charge. During this time, the Oglalas were preparing for battle. Eventually, the soldiers advanced very near the river, but before they could cross, they were met with fierce resistance from the Indians and were forced back to the ridge, where the main fight took place. While Reno's battle unfolded, Crazy Horse was also getting his warriors ready. However, he took the time to consult a medicine man and invoke the spirits, remaining calm while others grew impatient. Custer's men did not initially fire into the village, which added to the confusion of the fight. I remember taking a buckskin shirt from one of the dead soldiers, which I later gave to my mother. For years, I believed it to be Custer's shirt, as I was told he wore something similar. However, I later discovered that others had also found buckskin shirts among the deceased. At the time of the battle, no Indian recognized Custer's body, nor did they believe they were fighting Long Hair during the skirmish. I witnessed 3 Indian scouts being killed alongside Reno, one of whom they mistook for a Sioux. The weight of his words bore down on me, and with a nod, I tightened my grip on the reins, steeling myself for what lay ahead. As we prepared ourselves and set out, the women still hadn't returned from their gathering. We moved toward Custer, crossing at the mouth of Muskrat Creek. By then, we were to the north of the Santees. Upon crossing the Little Bighorn, the sight before us was overwhelming. Indians swarming around Custer's forces, with the relentless sound of gunfire filling the air. Among the returning warriors, I saw a Sioux named Long Elk. His mouth was full of blood, and his horse was injured. Blood splattered across its body. This was the first image that greeted us as we advanced. My group positioned itself on the west side of Custer, though we called this the rear end, since others had already advanced ahead of us. Spotting a horse, I quickly tied it up before pressing forward. As we moved, I saw another Sioux warrior, his mouth also filled with blood, struggling to keep his balance. He stood for a moment, swaying, before collapsing again. He had been wounded. Further along, I noticed a soldier lying dead, with fallen Indians surrounding him on the hillside. I couldn't tell how they had all fallen together since I hadn't been down there with them. When I finally reached a point where I could see more clearly, I realized that the soldiers had dismounted, holding their horses by the bridles, bracing themselves for our approach. Just then, they began shooting, and bullets poured down like rain around us. The Indians crept closer, keeping low as the gunfire whizzed overhead. We all shouted, "Ho-Kehi," and surged up the hill in a wave. The next sight that struck me was a group of soldiers, hats off, seated on the hill. But as soon as they spotted us, they fired without hesitation. Custer had positioned himself on a ridge, and we followed along its edge, seeing skirmishes unfolding. One Indian rode forward and fired at a soldier, who answered back immediately, bullets cutting through the air. As I reached the top, a Sioux warrior on horseback behind me called out, asking who had fallen. I told him it was Bighorn. Descending the hill again, we were approached by a man named Burst Thunder, who instructed us to come down further, saying there was a fallen man below, a Ree, who should be scalped. We moved as directed, and just as the scalping began, 2 Cheyenne warriors arrived. Burst Thunder questioned if the dead man was a Ree or a Cheyenne. One of the Cheyenne got off his horse, turned the body over, and saw it was actually a Cheyenne they had just scalped. It could have even been Lane White Man, the famed Southern Cheyenne war chief. In the chaos of battle, mistakes like this were happening everywhere, a testament to the madness that had overtaken us all. 3 riders emerged, carrying a fallen Cheyenne warrior with them, keeping him upright by riding close together on either side. As they moved down, I looked out toward where the soldiers were stationed, and another round of gunfire erupted from their position. The first time I glanced, there were many soldiers on the hill with Custer. But after a few more volleys from our side, their numbers dwindled noticeably. Some of the men around me shouted, "They have gone!" I looked over again and saw cavalry horses bolting away, their reins loose and flapping, having broken free in the chaos. On the northern side, our young warriors captured these scattered horses as they stampeded. Each time I looked back, fewer soldiers remained. Indians had surrounded the hill, closing in from all directions. After the horses stampeded, I heard again, "They are gone," signaling the soldiers' retreat, descending toward the Little Bighorn. We called out, "Ho-Kehi, hurry, hurry," and surged forward as one. Indians were charging from every direction, and soldiers and warriors became entangled in close combat, so fierce that the gunfire melted into one indistinct roar, seemingly blending into the clouds above. The soldiers, now descending toward the river, tried to hide in a low area covered in tall grass, but we were already upon them, leaving no chance for them to evade us. In the intensity of the battle, an Indian warrior rushed at the soldiers, and soon, all the remaining soldiers and even some of our own who had gone ahead fell. When the last soldier was killed, the sounds of the women approaching reached our ears, a haunting chorus, and the sight before us was staggering. Men and horses lay intermingled, some horses draped over men, and others, men over horses. With Custer's forces defeated, we regrouped, forming rows of 10 or 15 riders across as we headed back downhill. Near the mouth of Muskrat Creek, there was a small divide, and as we approached it, we spotted another detachment of soldiers in the distance, Godfrey's men, I later learned, who had come to support Custer. They opened fire as soon as they saw us, and the call to charge rippled through our ranks once more. The soldiers, seeing us approach, mounted their horses to retreat, and as they pulled back, I noticed 2 spades atop the hill. We reached their position and fired at the soldiers, managing to bring down only one. Quickly, we remounted and pursued them, and after downing one more soldier, we dismounted and performed the coup on him, completing our charge with a final act of honor. The soldiers retreated back to Reno's hill, where their pack mules waited. But the Indians quickly surrounded them once again, and we called out, "Ho-Kehi," as we opened fire. I watched as some soldiers tried to make their way toward the creek to fetch water, but as bullets flew, they turned back, abandoning their attempt. On the eastern side, an Indian rider ventured close to the white soldiers, boldly displaying his courage. In that moment, he was shot, and we were unable to recover his body. By this time, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows over the battlefield. The scent of blood hung heavy in the air, and though I hadn't felt hunger before, it began to creep in now. The soldiers stayed clustered on the hill, huddling around their pack mules. That evening, the bravest among us gathered to discuss our next move. We decided that some of us would stay to keep watch while the others returned to camp for food. We would stay here through the night, with the plan to starve or dehydrate the soldiers into submission. As dusk settled, a few of us made our way back to the camp to eat, while others remained on watch. When we reached camp, the sky was darkening. My feet were still bare and had been all day. I carried only a bow and arrows, along with a revolver. When Standing Bear was asked, "Did you kill anyone?" he responded, smiley face. Of course, it is difficult to share everything, but I will say some. In times like this, not everyone is fully aware of their actions. We shot at the soldiers, though we couldn't always tell if we hit our mark. Every time we fired, we had to lie flat to avoid their return fire, bullets zipping back each time we shot. It was intense, close-quarters fighting. When Custer's forces retreated up the hill, I grabbed my pistol, struck a soldier on the head, knocking him down, and then killed him. There were 4 or 5 of us for every one white man in this fight. After that, I turned to retreat, mindful that many Indians had fallen by our own actions. As I moved away, I saw a Sioux warrior closing in on a soldier who was nearby. The Sioux seized the soldier's bridle, and in sheer terror, the soldier leapt off his horse. Soon, several other Indians approached and killed the man, marking him with the coup and then moving on. I was dressed simply, barefoot and wearing only a shirt. Before the battle, I had shot a red bird and skinned it, believing, as many of us did, that a sacred ornament could offer protection. I wore the bird on my head, silently vowing to make an offering if its spirit helped shield me from harm in battle. Afterward, I heard much talk about Crazy Horse. It was widely said that he was the one who broke Reno's left wing, charging through and cutting them off. When I walked across the battlefield later, I saw where Reno had fought, and noticed a Ree scout had been killed there. Down by the creek, another Ree named Bloody Knife had also fallen in the thick brush. They had tried to escape up a narrow path, and another Ree lay dead nearby. When I returned, I thought the camp would have moved on, but it hadn't. Hunger gnawed at me, so I ate heartily. The camp had gathered into a dense, unified group. Though the atmosphere was still tense, we held no war dances that night. Fires were lit all around the camp, but as darkness settled, sleep was elusive. The memories of battle were fresh and haunting, and the whole village seemed to be stirring, too restless to sleep. As dawn broke, the criers called out, "The remainder of the soldiers shall perish today." The word sent a renewed surge of energy through the camp, and everyone mounted their horses, prepared to finish the fight. I was ready this time, dressed properly with moccasins, leggings, and even a saddle. The early light found us surrounding the soldiers again, our war cries of "Ho-Kehi" echoing as we opened fire. Our forces spread out, with some on one side, others scattered on another. The soldiers, desperate for water, would crawl toward the creek, only to retreat under fire as we shot at them. We were well concealed and had hidden our horses to keep them safe. Despite their return shots, we managed to stay out of sight, though one of their bullets struck a horse near me. It belonged to an older man, who approached and, seeing the buffalo hide blanket draped over the saddle, announced with pride that his horse was bulletproof. The bullet had bounced off the thick hide. Sure enough, we found the bullet lying near the horse. We lay low, waiting, until we heard someone say, "Hey, hey," signaling that one of our own had been hit. Crawling over, we found that he had been shot above the eyebrow and killed instantly. We continued firing at the soldiers, but their entrenched position made it difficult to reach them. Just then, we heard the crier's voice announcing, "Soldiers are reported to be coming." The message spread, and we understood it meant the camp would be moved. As everyone began to make their way back, I joined them. If General Terry hadn't arrived when he did, it's likely that every last one of those soldiers would have perished that day. As dawn broke the following morning, the promise of battle lingered once more. Criers announced that no soldiers would escape our vengeance, and our warriors, now fully prepared, mounted their horses with renewed determination. We returned to Reno's hill, encircling the soldiers and firing with shouts of "Ho-Kehi" echoing through the air. They crawled, desperate, toward the creek for water, only to retreat under the relentless fire of our arrows and bullets. And though reinforcements would eventually arrive, preventing total annihilation, the soldiers who fled that day left behind the memory of their defeat, one that settled into the land itself, marking the resilience and unity of our people.